So yes, let's talk about rubbish. So this is not my research, it's not what I do in my working time. This is what I do in my spare time. I actually now volunteer quite a bit on my Saturdays and Sundays at different organizations and help people actually learn about how to reduce their waste at home. And if you're interested, next week on Saturday is the Margaret River Show. So if you want to go to beautiful Margaret River, beautiful region in the southwest of Western Australia, come over to the Margaret River Show and you'll see me at the stand talking about exactly the same rubbish. So today I'm going to talk about rubbish and globally and in Australia, or the issues that we have about our production of waste. And I'm going to approach it from a household and individual level about what can we do. So I'm not going to approach it from an economic perspective about what economic tools we could use, which they exist and they have been shown to work in the research, or about what we could do in terms of government regulation. So I'm only going to approach it at a household individual level. So first of all, I think most of you are aware, but if you're not, just know that we are actually drowning in rubbish. We humans are pretty much the only species that on the planet that produce such a thing as waste. Anything in all of the animals does not go to waste. Or in other words, it does not stop the natural processes of the local ecosystems. And this is the kind of things that we just simply put away in a rubbish bin, and most of the time in developed countries like Australia, because we don't see what happens to it, out of our minds, out of our sights, out of our minds. So we most of the time don't know what happens to what we put in our rubbish bins. And we have been producing more and more waste over time. So the global amount of waste that we have today in the planet is unprecedented, and it keeps increasing. So, for example, this is a paper in Nature that shows the waste generation tons per day worldwide, and it just shows how much it has increased in the past century. In about 1975, globally, on average, each person was producing about half a kilo per person per day of waste. Today, it's more about 750 grams. So it has increased since 1975 by 50%, and it keeps increasing. So usually when people are, usually more in a developed country, and when people then start to have better standards of living, they start looking for different alternatives to producing less waste. And a lot of the times waste stagnates, and it reaches what we call peak waste. But unfortunately, the question is, when are we going to reach that peak? And ideally, we will reach it very soon and start to reduce our waste globally as soon as possible. And I'll talk about the environmental impacts that our production of waste has later. But if we continue with the current socioeconomic trends that we have in our planet, this peak waste is unlikely to occur in this century. So we'll continue to increase the amount of waste that we produce globally, but also the amount of waste per person. Globally, what happens to everything that we put in our rubbish bins? About 37% goes to a landfill, so it's basically a hole in the ground where all the waste is put in there, or just simply dumped anywhere in the bush. So that's 70%. 70% globally of the waste that we humans produce goes just out there to the environment. 19% is recovered or recycled or reused, and 11% is incinerated, and this changes from one country to another. What about Australia? How is our waste production in Australia? This is a global map of the waste generation per capita per day in kilograms. The darker the yellow color, the worse. So in Australia, we're among the worst countries in the planet for waste production daily. So basically, we produce a lot of rubbish. In terms of what type of waste we produce, MSW is municipal solid waste. This is basically what we put in our rubbish bins, in our wheelie bins that we take out to the street every week, and also local government. C&I is commercial and industrial waste, and C and D is construction and demolition. So most of it comes from commercial and industrial and construction demolition. But we still have to say a lot for what we put in the rubbish bins weekly. And it has been reduced a little bit in the last 11 years. So we've reduced a little bit of waste per capita in tons per year by 5% over the last 11 years, but we're still producing quite a lot. About 58%, we're in a developed country. In most developing countries, the picture is very different. In Australia, 58% is collected for recycling. That does not mean recycled. And I want to make the difference because the data available is extremely interesting. They count it only when it is separated at the point of separation, whether it is something that they can reuse or not. So it's collected for recycle. But we've had a few issues. A lot of the plastic, 70% of the plastic that we collect for recycle, we send it overseas. We used to send it to China, but China closed its doors because a lot of the plastic was contaminated. When the plastic is contaminated, meaning dirty with anything that we put in the plastic, a lot of the times it's not recycled and sent to landfill instead. So they were basically filling up their landfills with our waste. The glass, I don't know if you've heard of the glass issue recently in Australia, is a lot cheaper to actually import glass from elsewhere and buy the glass already made for the products that we package here in Australia than to recycle the glass in Australia. So basically at the moment, a lot of the glass that is collected for recycle is just stacking up in facilities where the recyclers are trying to actually do something with it, but it's way too expensive and there is not a market in Australia for it. About 43% of metal is sent also overseas and 43% of the paper. The destinations are usually Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and there are a few other countries, mostly in Southeast Asia, where sometimes the regulations are not as strict and a lot of it still ends up either illegally recycled or dumped in nature. 38% of what we produce as waste goes to landfill and 4% to energy recovery, either through production of methane from landfills. They produce a lot of greenhouse gas emissions that a lot of the times are collected to produce energy or sometimes incinerated. So how did we get here? How did we get to produce more than 2 kilos of waste per person per day? So we, since the 1950s, have been having this notion of a single-use throwaway society. And you had, at the time, in the 1950s, early 1950s, these ads that promoted single-use items, but mostly plastic, or made of cardboard but lined with plastic, like the Dixie cup, and it says, no more in-between meal dishwashing, no more glasses to be dried and put away, no more broken glasses, no more piled-up sinks after late-hour snacks or after school milk. So this is going to solve all your problems. You have more time, basically, for yourself. But what we didn't think about at the time is what was going to be the impacts of changing basically so many of our habits into a single-use throwaway society. And we see it everywhere. Once you start looking, we see it everywhere. So we have single-use plastic bags, and now we've banned in Australia and in many countries. Single-use cleaning products, single-use takeaway containers, single-use cutlery, single-use everything is incredible. Sometimes for health reasons, but sometimes completely unnecessary. And most of all that ends up in landfill. So a lot of it comes from buying packaged processed foods, which are not good for you to start with, very processed foods. The fresher the better. But anyway, sometimes, it's just a little bit easier to grab the thing from the supermarket and less time and then go and cook it. But the impacts that has for our health and for the planet are enormous. And also, not taking the time for cooking, not preparing our own meals, takeaway is easier, quicker. That also has its impacts, particularly because here we're contributing then to the commercial and industrial waste that gets created as well, indirectly. Fast fashion. Recently has been this trend of the fashion industry, instead of, there used to be like after Christmas sale. I remember there was that big one and that was it. Now there is an after Christmas sale, after winter sale. And then now there is new fashion coming out, not only in spring and autumn, but in all of these seasons, spring, autumn, winter, summer. And they are created every time with less and less good quality fabrics. And the fashion industry is just changing all the time so that you basically don't use your garment for a long time. Fashion industry is so big in this planet that it's about 2% of global gross domestic product. 2% is one of the biggest industries in the world, but it's also one of the most polluting ones, second only to oil. So most of the time, people actually buy their clothes, wear them on average 2-3 times, and throw them away. 2-3 times. That's the average, in Australia at least. And we throw away about 85% to landfill of the textiles that we use. 85% of the textiles that we use go to landfill. So this has become a serious issue. Gadgets. Changing gadgets. I mean, I'm now in the trouble of the existential issue of upgrading or not, because my current technology does not accept new apps anymore. Because that's what they do. The companies, they don't allow you to actually update your operating system or your applications after a while, and so you see yourself obliged to change it when it's actually a perfectly good working piece of technology. And so that's very difficult. But here as well, we're also very exposed to advertisement on things that are really not that necessary in life, but they, you know, they sell it just because that way we can have more stuff. Kid toys is one of those, yeah, incredible. And you know, like, sometimes you think, do they really need all that to be happy? And will they make the difference if it is bought secondhand or new? I think, you know, it's just a really difficult one, but it's just important to realize where we get, you know, all the waste that we are producing, because all these ends up most of the time in landfill. Baby products, the big issue, nappies. Nappies, they are a really big issue because they have a fantastic thing inside, which is the human waste. That can be reused for many other things, but the plastic and wrapped in plastic and contaminated plastic cannot. So the environmental impacts of all this are also significant. One of the, you know, most, I guess, well known of is plastic pollution in the ocean. So about 8 million tons of plastic go into the ocean every year. 8 million tons of plastic, which is the equivalent of having a big rubbish truck full of plastic and dumping it into the ocean every minute. One big rubbish truck every minute into the ocean. What happens to that rubbish? Some of it goes to the bottom. Plastic, as you probably already know, does not disintegrate. It actually simply becomes smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. So you have something like plastics that are bigger than 5 millimeters have a name, and smaller than 5 millimeters have an A, and smaller than 1 millimeter have an A. So it's all that we call microplastics and nanoplastics. They become smaller and smaller and smaller. So it does not biodegrade, it does not disintegrate. And so basically it's still there. Pretty much all of the plastic, you know, most of the plastic that has ever been produced is still out there somewhere. It's just spread around all over the place. And what happens in the oceans is that there are these currents that all the plastic that is not very heavy, that doesn't go to the bottom, it actually floats and goes around in the currents and just kind of goes together and stays together, forming some sort of like kind of islands a little bit. And one of the ones that is very well known is the one that forms these three, the Western Garbage Patch, Subtropical Convergence Zone, and Eastern Garbage Patch. And all of those together are what is called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which a lot of people have heard of, is about the size of Texas, just a whole pile of rubbish, of which 95% is plastic, 90 to 95%. But a lot of people have heard of that one, but there are others. There is a South Pacific one, there is a North Atlantic one, there is a South Atlantic one, and the Indian Ocean also has a lot of rubbish in it, but it's a bit more spread around. It's slightly different how the currents work inside. So the people that were in charge of looking for the Malaysia flight that crashed into the ocean were looking for the pieces of the plane, they found enormous amount of plastic that they were not expecting to find in the Indian Ocean. So what happens to marine life and to animals in the ocean is that they get either ingest and die from ingestion of plastic, they get tangled in plastic, and sometimes die, sometimes, they grow in funny ways. So a lot of the times they die. About 1 million birds die every year from ingestion of plastic. So basically they take plastic for food, they eat it, but it's not giving them any nutrition, they die. And about 100,000 marine animals die every year from either entanglement or ingestion. So the environmental impacts are just mind-blowing. And if we think that that does not affect us directly, it does completely. Every time we eat something that comes from the ocean, we're eating plastic too. So these are pictures of salt crystals that are just magnified by a lot. And then you see the tiny little pieces of plastic everywhere. So we're eating plastic. Apparently, according to a recent report, we eat the equivalent of a credit card every week. That's very worrying. So it's 5 grams. It's a recent report by the University of Newcastle. So that just kind of opens your eyes a little bit to everything that is happening. So what can we do? Can we do much? Is a very, very hard question. And I think it's an involvement of everyone. It's not only us as individuals, but it starts with us as individuals, and then it goes out with all of the stakeholders. We need definitely serious changes in how the industry packages things. And there are steps that are being taken now. But today I'm going to focus about what we, as individuals, can do. So, stop shopping at Coles, Woolworths, Aldi, or any supermarket. No more products, beauty products, or cosmetics. Start living in a farm, producing your own food, and buy everything secondhand. And if you do that, you'll be overwhelmed. So, of course, this is not where we can start. This is one of the best pictures that we can use in terms of reduction of waste. And I'm talking everything, not just plastic. But simply is to start by refusing. The waste that does not come into our home does not go out of our home. So basically just refusing to take the free sample of blah, blah, blah. No, thank you, I don't want the waste. I used to be, and now it's interesting to see how I see the world now differently with this. I loved conference goodies. Oh my God! Going to a conference and getting all the goodies, that was the best thing, You just got all sorts of pens, all sorts of really cool stuff at conferences. And recently I did my stock of stationery that I had collected over the years in conferences. I have pens for life. I don't need to buy a pen ever again. So it's quite, confronting when I start having a look at this. It's like, why did I take them in the first place? I have plenty. I don't need them. So refusing is the first step. Reducing, if you cannot refuse, maybe reducing instead of buying the small package of lentils, maybe buying a bigger one. That reduces the amount of bags. Reuse, if possible, as much as we can. And you'll be surprised, even if you're not going to reuse yourself, how many people are willing to reuse everything. I've put stuff on Gumtree that I was surprised that people would take, and they do. It's fantastic. It's amazing what people can do with things these days. Recycle. That's why recycle is on the 4th step, because recycle, what we're seeing, a lot of it is still not recycled. It also takes extra resources to be processed and recycled. And we are, at the end of the day, not quite solving the problem. So a lot of people, when they say they go zero waste, they say they're producing no waste, but that means zero waste to landfill. What about your recycling bin? How is that looking? So I actually count everything. For me, recycling is waste. So if I count both of my bins as what I produce as waste, it's not that the recycle one, unless it actually is, but most of the time it actually isn't recycled. And then, last option, rot. But I think a lot of the times we need to rethink as well our lives. I think that comes, even quite at the top, is like, how can we actually rethink our lives and just act differently so that all of these things basically don't happen, and we reduce the amount of waste that we produce. And we can do very simple things. And now I'm going to just go through a very, very series of very simple steps that some of you may be already aware of. I'm doing lots of them and some not. And it's just really useful to have a look at the alternatives that exist already for many things. So plastic, for example, straws. There are many alternatives now. And the question really, rethinking first, before refusing the straw, do you actually really ever need a straw? I mean, for me, it has not improved the taste ever. So now I go like, well, I actually don't really ever need a straw, apart from when I drink a coconut. And, you know, and then now I have the alternatives for the coconut, the hot coconut that I drink. It took a picture, a video that went a bit viral in the United States, of a turtle with a straw stuck up his nostril, bleeding from it, to be able to finally change regulations and ban plastic straws in some states in the US. But we have to sometimes get to that point to see what it is doing to the planet, what we are doing to animals on the planet because of what we choose to use. Cling wrap is one of the easiest things, to just wrap things in cling wrap and then take them wherever we go. But there are so many alternatives these days. You know, there are these little wraps of, made of cloth with sometimes vegetable or bee wax. And they work perfectly well. They're exactly the same. There is no need for cling wrap at all. Or if you do want to use the plastic, but at least use it for a long time, there are these silicone stretchable thingies that you can put as well on your food. And, you know, the little plastic, plastic-free pockets of also wax piece of cloth for the sandwich. So there are lots of little alternatives for everything. You will think that these days most people will use actually the Keep cup, but it's surprising to know how many people still don't, and still go for the single-use cup for their coffee, or they, even if they sometimes use some of those that are considered compostable, they still don't put in a place where it will go actually to a compost. So it's a really hard one. It's very, very easy, simple steps. Bottle of water. You're drinking plastic, by the way, when you're drinking bottle of water. And it's true, actually, there are a few micrograms in each bottle of water that you drink of plastic. The alternatives are very easy. And now it's actually even easier because there are refill water stations popping up everywhere. Before it used to be very difficult, and refilling your water, you know, depending where you were, it was not very easy. And for example, in places where you wouldn't trust the water from the tap, we're lucky in Australia that we can, but in some places you just wouldn't trust the water from the tap. So you want a refill station for water that is actually good. Now you can go to most Southeast Asian countries, if you do travel there, and actually download an app that will tell you where the refill stations are located. So there are many things now that if you actually look for the alternatives, you can easily find them. In Australia, we banned the big plastic bag that we get out of the supermarket, but then we still go to the supermarket, grab a little transparent plastic bag, put our things there, and are happy that we're taking in the reusable bag. Except that these little plastic bag, most of the time, ends in landfill. Why? Soft and noisy plastics are not recycled when you put them in your recycling bin, ever. They're only recycled if you take them to Coles and Woolworths, to a small place that is called Rethink. So they ship it all to Melbourne, where there is a recycling facility, and they use that plastic to produce park benches and very durable chairs for meetings and things for local government. But now they're out of market. How many park benches and how many chairs can you produce? So this recycle is an option, and the problem is that they're reaching a market saturation. But there are other options. There are these produce bags that you can take and every time reuse in each supermarket. And even better, if you grab one of those old curtains, the very old curtains that are kind of transparent, and you grab one of those from an op shop or anywhere, or you know, someone that you know that has an old one, you can repurpose that curtain and make actually little recycled produce bags. And if you actually happen to have one of those curtains and don't know how to sew, give it to me, I'll make you your bags. I love doing that. Buying in the supermarket is one of the most challenging things for reducing waste. So we have to actually change our habits and where we go, or actually be a bit more active in what we ask from the producers where we buy things from. So if we're, for example, buying something that we really like, but we would like it to have an option without plastic, you can email, you can contact the producers and see if they're thinking about alternatives. Sometimes, you know, that actually changes things. Or you can go to a bulk store. Now they're also popping up everywhere. You can go to a store where they say everything just in bulk, and they actually get big, big, big packages of the stuff. They still produce waste, yes. But this waste that they produce compared to the amount of that we produce, as an individual daily from buying the little individual packages is much, much lower. So you go in with your little glass jars that you have kept at home from whatever you have bought, or with your little reusable produce bags, or with whatever container you think you could use. You weigh it before, write the weight of the item that you're going to use to refill it, and go and fill it with whatever you want, and then you pay for only the weight of the stuff. They remove the weight of your container. So it's a really, really, really easy thing to do for the dry goods. It does mean that you have to go to a separate place for your vegetables, a separate place for your dry goods, a separate place for possibly your meat. And my question is it worth it? Well, is the planet worth it? Is our changing our habits, for the sake of the planet, is it worth it? Now you can also use bars of shampoo. If you go in, and they sell them in these bulk stores as well, without plastic packaging. So there are a lot of alternatives that we can think of. In buying takeaway, just reducing it. It doesn't mean that, when we go and then buy a takeaway, it's like, oh my gosh, now I bought takeaway and feel guilty. No, just simply think about it in advance and maybe change it. You change it once, you change it twice. Every single time is a small success. When you're traveling, have you noticed in airplanes how much we eat that all goes to landfill? I've asked, I've inquired, nothing is recycled. Nothing. In most airlines, it depends on the airline, some do an effort, but it's really, really hard to recycle anything in an airplane. So a bit more organization it requires, but what can we do? Yay! Your little lunch in the plane. Maybe avoid, as much as you can traveling. That's also very good for the planet. But it's not, people look at you weird. It's like, don't you know that there is food in the plane? It's like, but it takes this to actually change things. It doesn't reduce the waste, admittedly, so it doesn't reduce the waste. But it does change the matrix, because they have a matrix to count how many meals to put into the plane for the number of people that are going to be in the plane. They have a matrix, but the more people bring their own meals, that matrix changes, and the less meals they put in. That's how it started. But now, they're starting to rethink everything from having a look at people doing this, and Qantas had their first waste-free flight last year. So it was a flight from Sydney to Adelaide, and the customers were just, welcome as usual, but with a little twist. Today, we're having a waste-free flight. And we are actually, they were piloting to see what it would be, what it would mean for the company, what it would mean for the customers, and just to see what is going to happen. So there is a start. Just from doing this, and having these companies getting a little bit more interested in what's happening with their waste, things are slowly changing. The razor, the plastic razor that then we throw away after a few uses, maybe more entirely recyclable option is better. So yes, there are a lot of different alternatives, and also without forgetting, having a look at your recycling bin. So in your recycling bin, you go with this, the Tetra brick, non-recyclable. Too expensive to recycle. There are mixes of cardboard, aluminium, and plastic lining stick together. Really, really expensive to separate those three materials. So we call this a problem child. It's one of those things that we produce that is extremely handy, but is a serious problem because it can be recycled, but at a really, really high cost. So it's not done. A lot of this could be avoided, and we're going to have a look at how, but all these plastics, it's not quite single use, you have to keep them at home for quite a while, but they are, because they bring you the clean product just once. Glass is also becoming a problem now because of the issues with recycling here in Australia. And this bin, don't look at that bin, because everything that is in there should not be in that red bin. But getting information about what goes and doesn't go in your bins is also helping a little bit the environment, in your local environment and your local council to actually be able to deal with the waste. So for instance, one of the most important things that I learned from a course that I did with my local council was that glass in the red bin in the city of Stirling, which was where I was one of the worst things that I could do. So even if it was broken glass, because I thought, like the honey pot or peanut butter pot that gets broken on the floor, you're not going to clean every piece of glass and then put it in the recycling bin, because everything, plastic and glass, has to be cleaned before it goes into the recycling bin. Otherwise, it's not recycled. Contaminated is not recycled. So glass, the red bin in the city of Stirling and a few of the councils actually goes to a composting facility, and they're trying to make compost out of everything they can. But the only thing, plastic, they managed to get it to remove it. But the only thing that they cannot possibly remove from their compost at the end of the whole process is glass. So they cannot sell their compost for a high product to people that will use it because it's contaminated with glass. And one of the easiest things that we can do is actually compost ourselves. So buying a second-hand composting bin is really easy. And the easiest thing to remember with composting, you put half the amount in the compost bin of your food scraps or any green leaves that you pick in the garden, half of dry stuff. And that stuff also includes paper, paper towel, toilet paper, tissues. It's really easy, half-half. And what that turns into is dirt, is actually earth that you can then put into your plants, and the plants are super happy with it. It's extremely easy, and I was almost shocked in learning how, once you start doing it, how easy it is. For the ladies in the room, and for the husbands and parents in the room, to communicate to your wives and daughters, there are lots of alternatives now for women to actually not use single plastic every month. So we have things like the monthly cup, reusable items as well that we can have, so that we actually don't produce any plastic every month. Very easy alternatives, work super well. And then there's the rest, right? Toothpaste, deodorant, all the cleaning products. We are basically, when you start having a look, invaded by plastic and just reducing it, you realize how difficult it is in life to do it. So I set myself up an experiment of producing my own deodorant with, varying success. I think I have now reached, I can confirm, the final success in my product, but it took me quite a few unpleasant experiences and being quite self-conscious, being around people, and not working to actually be able to get to where I am now. So it's basically produced from products that I can get either bulk or that I can get in big containers that I then reuse myself, the containers, for preserving food. And the toothpaste, we're about to finish our last little thing of toothpaste, and now I'm getting into, okay, what can I do to actually replace this and then, have something new. Cleaning products, water, vinegar, lemon, essential oils, that's it. Easy, super good cleaning product. No need for anything else, all the chemicals. And I can actually eat it if I want to, my own cleaning product. Meat, that's a really difficult one. A lot of the supermarkets or places where you buy meat, they will refuse to give it to you in your own Tupperware or in your own container. Or if they do, in any case, they have to use a completely new plastic bag to pick up the items and put them in your container and throw that back. So the plastic is produced anyway. I mean, the waste is produced anyway. So it's a really hard one. I think in this case, trying the best that we can is always, the way to go for. Maybe reducing meat is also a very good idea, including fish, because most of the plastic that is in the ocean is actually from fish nets. So, by eating fish, we are also creating, indirectly contributing to all these issues. But yeah, this is a very difficult one. So now I don't eat meat myself. I do buy some chicken carcasses for my dogs. So I buy a big box of chicken carcass every few months. And that way they still have a bit of their bone and meat. So, but it is one of the most challenging ones, I admit. It's really, really hard. So the question is, should we aim for zero waste? Like this is the little container of sometimes people 4 years of living zero waste, and this is what they produce. Of course, they're not counting the recycling, the recycling bin, but anyway. I think more importantly is actually becoming responsible buyers. And I've realized that buying anything is like voting. It's basically saying, yes, I'm okay with this product, being the way it is, and being packaged the way it is, and eating this the way it is, and saying I'm okay with that or not. And it's really hard, because then you're going to go, okay, well, this t-shirt is not in plastic, but this one that is actually produced way more sustainably is in plastic. So, you know, there are things like that, the trade-offs that we are actually making that really, really become really hard. And often we hear the individual actions are too small and they change nothing. But I think we forget that the accumulation of individual actions are incredibly powerful. Or I'm alone in doing this. Yes, it does feel like swimming against the current, and for a while it probably will, until we all basically come together into this, and then start putting pressure as well towards the producers of our foods to actually change. But I think better than, you know, saying anything myself, I'm going to leave you with some wise words from wise people. I think wise people are, you know, they just say the ideas really well. And I think more than the question is, are my individual actions going to change anything? The question is, who do we choose to be? So it's more, what is it that I actually choose to do on an everyday basis? And like Leo Tolstoy say, everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing him or Ayade herself. So it is really, really easy, you know, to wanting to change things, but without starting with ourselves. Jane Goodall said, you cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do, and I stress, everything you do, everything we do, makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. I love this one of Gandhi, be the change that you wish to see in the world. And I think that's exactly it. It's just in everything we do, being that change. I think it's just, you know, for me, it's one of the most fulfilling ways to live. And this one, you probably know it. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make a change. Ow! Favorite song ever. But it does have a really, really important message, you know, is if you want to make something better, start here. And it's just fantastic. And there is no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about. So I think, you know, as the cumulative actions of individuals can make a huge difference. So I'm going to leave you with those quotes. And if you've learned anything today of what you could, just one action that you could do to make a difference, that's my job done, at least one. If you do it all already, come and talk, I'll give you a list of the rest. And, you know, if you actually already do it all, happy to share the presentation for you to share it with someone else. Because that way is how we spread the word for creating some change in waste. And come to Margaret River, it's lovely. Thank you.